Yeah, we're live. Yes, I know. But again, it's a black screen. All right, I'm gonna go through this, and this is gonna be an audio podcast then. So, and I'll figure out what to do with this after. But if it is picking up the audio, which is most important. Okay, so lymphatic system. Let's talk about it. So, why is the lymphatic system so important? So, it needs to come back to it. If you go back, I've written some blogs, I've done some videos on this, on the importance of water. We are 70% water. If you count up the molecules, we're about 99% water by weight. Or sorry, if you were to count up all the molecules, we're 99% water, which is pretty wild. And lymph, so and then in the body, we have two primary extracellular fluids. So these are fluids outside of the cells. So the cells obviously have a lot of water in them, but then outside the cells, we have fluid. The two primary ones are going to be lymph and they're going to be blood. Now, just as a society, this is what I learned through functional medicine, through my schooling. A lot of it is we focus on blood tests, which is kind of strange when you consider that again, 20% of that extracellular fluid is blood, and the rest is this lymphatic. It's lymph fluid. So this needs to be taken up. So I think the best example of this, I like Dr. Morse's kind of explanation of this because it's to me, it's the cleanest and makes the most sense. It's you have your blood system, which is it delivers nutrients, it delivers glucose, it delivers oxygen to cells, for cells to use to create energy, to create their own type of water, to create ATP, to use as energy. So this blood goes from, it goes once it gets oxygenated from the lungs, go back to the heart, go to whatever tissues it needs to go to. It drops off whatever it needs to. It picks up some carbon dioxide, but and then the cells are going to use whatever it needs to, the oxygen, the glucose, etc. And part of that process is it creates its own waste product. So you have to remember, nature in a lot of its ways is fractal. So what's happening down in cells is actually the same thing we do, just at a much smaller scale. So what do I mean by that? If you're going to cook a meal for yourself, you're going to go in the kitchen, you're going to get the ingredients, you're going to prepare them, you're going to cut them, you're going to cook them if you do that, and then you're going to put it together and eat it. What happens when you eat something? You take in the food, you break it down into its smallest parts, and then from there, what you're going to do is you're going to take what you want out of it, and then the rest we want to get rid of. We don't want to keep it in the body, right? Cells do the same thing. They take oxygen, they take glucose, do all this stuff, and then what they're going to do is create their own digestive waste, their own cellular waste, and then we have to flush those out. That is fundamentally what our lymphatic system is going to do. It's going to pick those up in the extracellular matrix, whatever needs to be taken out, and then get it to where it needs to go so that it can be removed. So digestive waste, cellular waste, they work more or less the same way, just at different scales. So it's that's probably the easiest way to look at it. Now, this is why the lymphatic system is so important. And by the way, where do most of those wastes come from? Well, if you look at how our lymphatic system is broken down, most of the tissue is going to be actually in that abdominal region, right around that gut lining. You'll see this known as gut-associated lymphoid tissue, or GALT, and then you'll see it's around other mucosal membranes. So again, why mucosal membranes? That's really where we interact with the outside world. Think of, the throat, right? That's called mucosal associated lymphoid tissue. So it's kind of this interface between the outside world, which again, the digestive tract, if you think about it, is part of the outside world. It's not our internal environment, and what gets in. The lymphatic system is kind of that screener. It screens what's coming in. We take in what we need, we get rid of what we don't need to, and then the cycle repeats itself as long as we're alive. So there's a lot to it. Now, a lot of times there could be backups, and usually this is in a higher acid load. It could be for whatever reason. Sometimes it's an injury, and sometimes you get swelling to an area, and that's important because that's going to bring different healing factors to an area so that it can begin to heal. Maybe it's more blood, maybe it's more repair, maybe it's more white blood cells, maybe it's more nutrients you need to build, repair collagen formation, say if it's an injury. So all of that stuff's important, but the thing is you have to be able to cycle that out when it's time to do that. And that's what the lymphatic system's for. It's going to take out those excess white blood cells, that excess, those breakdown products, those waste products, so that they can be eliminated. So effectively, what I'm trying to say here is if you think about it, your blood, your heart, your circulatory system is effectively your kitchen. It supplies what you need. Whereas the lymphatic system is functionally your sewer system, right? It's your septic tank, it's your septic system in general. It's going to take these things in, it's going to break down whatever it needs to. Sometimes there's bacteria, viruses, fungi, all these things can end up in the lymphatic system. They need to be managed appropriately in the right way. But the only way that happens is if these things are moving, right? The lymphatic system does not have a pump like the heart does. So that's really one of the biggest differences between the heart and, the circulatory system and the lymphatic system. We don't have that centralized pump that we do in other cases. So what gets it moving? Well, there's a lot of things that you can do to get the lymph moving. Now, there's a couple of things I think you could do at home to kind of test where you're at. So I've talked about this, I think, in another video, but one of the things that I always recommend is like sometimes getting a pH paper could be really useful. Something very cost effective. You could do it online. You could probably get, I don't know, hundreds of strips for $5, $10 on like Amazon or wherever. Or if you have a pool, you probably already have pH strips because you use these to test your own water, right? Now, ideally you want your internal pH to be somewhere between around 6 and 6.5. So if it's lower than that, it tends to be more acidic. If it's higher than that, it tends to be more alkaline. Now, one of the best books that I would recommend reading if you want to learn more about this connection would be one of Jerry Tennant's books, Healing is Voltage. Talks about the connection between perhaps cellular pH levels, which tend to be about 0.8 pH units higher than urine. That's about the conversion. So, and that makes sense because what is the body's pH? It's around 7.3, 7.4. It's in that tight range. It does not really change. What happens is it's stuck within about 7.35 to 7.45. That's where it is. If it tends to go more acidic, the actual value in the blood probably isn't going to change. But what's going to happen is you're going to take all these alkalizing agents. Usually those are our minerals. That's our magnesium. That's our salts. So sodium, potassium, magnesium, manganese, all of these alkalizing minerals tend to get used up as a buffer. So what tends up happening in those people, if you keep ripping those out, what happens? You end up with things like osteoporosis, osteopenia later in life. These are things that shouldn't necessarily happen. Calcium's another one. So, there's only 4 ways we can neutralize an acidic environment, which is when we're sick, we tend to lean towards that. One of which is these minerals that I mentioned. Another is water. Another is fat, which is where the liver comes in because it can store excess toxic waste and fat. And then cholesterol is the other one, which is why you see sometimes high cholesterol because cholesterol is very alkalizing. It's actually very healing in and of itself. When it goes high, that should be a marker that or a red flag as to something else is going off. Cholesterol doesn't necessarily cause problems. It is the result of a problem. It is the equivalent. Blaming cholesterol for, say, heart problems or heart disease or atherosclerosis is the equivalent of showing up or you see a house on fire and the fire department's out front and you say the fireman caused the fire. It's not that. It's showing up to the scene to help kind of put it out. That's not what we're talking about today, but just kind of a concept of how we alkalize, how we find that balance. The actual pH number in the blood does not change. Urine can. Blood does not necessarily change. What it does do is it takes all of these alkalizing units, like I said, water, cholesterol, fat. It actually will store these things in fat if the liver and your other detox organs can't handle it. or these minerals, calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, all of which are very alkalizing in and of themselves. So when I'm working with a patient, whether it's in an office and it's an injury, whether it's digestive problems, whether it's sleep problems, the first step, or I should say, the way to clear someone is to make sure this stuff is moving. So, what I really want to do today is talk about the primary tools that you have to get your lymphatic system flowing on your own. Because the truth is, we could use herbs, and I'm going to talk about some of my favorite ones at the end. But the truth of the matter is, that's like the last step. Like if you're not, it's herbs, and this is again another thing that's very different from the conventional model is you're not using herbs as a replacement for medication is not a good way to look at it. Herbs really are used to enhance the body's function. They are not meant to suppress symptoms. So, and the truth of the matter is in healing, like the first step is usually to take out the thing that is injuring you, that is causing a toxic overload. If you're just going to add in more things, but you're not going to get rid of the toxin source, you're not going to get the ideal level. The first step and the most effective step is to remove whatever is the insult is, right? So, okay. So, first thing, and I know this comes up all the time because I know some people are like, oh, yeah, get a rebounder. Rebounder is the best way to get the lymphatic system moving. It's a way to do it. It is just a tool. So your best tool is actually just everything you already have with you. It's your own body and your ability to move it. So lymph is moved primarily one of three ways. It's going to be pressure changes in the blood and vascular system and the lymphatic system. It's going to be contraction of skeletal muscle, right? So if I move my arm, that's contraction and extension of certain muscles. So that is going to move lymph. And the third is the contraction of smooth muscle, right? So that's also going to be how well peristalsis is, how well you are moving food inside your body. Your smooth muscle is contracting. So any sort of movement is going to help move lymph in your body. I'm going to give you some examples down the road that I like, but just kind of keep that in mind. So it could be jumping rope. It could be calf jumps, which I like, but it's kind of the same thing as jumping rope, but you're not going to be using a rope. Running, walking, any sort of athletic activity. So if you play a sport, whether recreationally or in college or what have you, all of which is going to help get your lymphatic system moving. So that to me is step one. You have to get moving. Ideally, the more you can do it outside, connected to nature, barefoot, all great, all things that you should kind of look at. So that's step one. Number two would be a stimulating lymphatic drainage using your own hands, which you can do. So you could do this as a practitioner. You could do this on yourself. I am more of a fan of giving you the things to do at home yourself because 99% of the time, you're not going to be in someone's office, right? So you need tools at home because that's where you're spending most of your time. So one of mine is actually Dr. Perry Nicholson's Big Six. I really like it. And effectively, I'll kind of demonstrate it here. So there's 6 points that you're going to massage, and then you're going to tap. You could stimulate them however you want. You could rub, you could tap, you can slap a little bit harder. It just kind of depends. Obviously, what I will say is you don't want to do this if there's any pain. So if there's an injury, you don't want to use that, hit that area. But you can use, say, one arm instead of the other. If say you have an injury on your left arm, then just do your right. So have some common sense with that. But there's 6. So it's at the clavicle, kind of like, which is your collarbone, above and below it. You're going to go up in the neck. And sometimes if you see swelling, you're going to see it there. It could happen at the side of the neck. It's kind of like the larger lymph nodes are going to be kind of in between the ear and your occiput, which is this kind of the mastoid that you'll see kind of behind the ear here. Occiput in the back, mastoid. So kind of in between there are where those lymph nodes are. Third one is the armpit. So like kind of where your pec muscle is, kind of right in there. The fourth one is your abdomen. So you can rub slap. Your fifth is your groin. So it's actually the hip crease. So the easiest way to measure this is if you're sitting down, where you see that bend from your abdomen to your legs, that's your hip crease. Easier way to do it if you're standing like I am, you could just kind of lift your leg up. Where you see that fold, that's where you want to massage hit. And then the last place is behind the knee. It's in that popliteal space, that popliteal space, which is behind the knee. So you would rub there, slot there. So just to quickly kind of go over it, above and below the clavicle, kind of the jawline, like right behind that angle of the jaw, behind behind the ear, the chest, or really the axilla part, your armpit. You want to do the abdomen, you want to do the groin, and then you want to do behind the knee. So if you're looking for a quick way to kind of get your lymph moving, that would be the best way to do it. If you want to add on, some people like jade rollers. You could certainly do massage on the face to get some drainage out of the face as well. All those are good options. So that's a good one. Another one. So, if you're on anything that's going to constrict blood vessels and lymph vessels, going to be a problem. Though that includes things like caffeine, alcohol, and nicotine. These constrict those vessels, so it's going to make it harder for lymph to flow. Something to think about. Another one from a nutrition standpoint is magnesium. So most Americans in general are magnesium deficient. Depending on where you look, it's between like 60 and 80%. That's a lot. You'll also see that most people don't eat even the RDA recommended values of vegetables, which is like fruits and vegetables, which is like 5 servings a day. The easiest way you're going to get magnesium straight up is from fruits and vegetables. We could talk about nutrition and go into more detail about it. My first blog is on it, so you can go check it out if you want. But the super simple take-home message is, if you want to start, get at least 10 servings of fruits and vegetables per day, period. If you're not even close to that now, start slow and build up, because sometimes adding too much fiber too quickly can lead to constipation, but that works itself out usually over a few weeks. So if you're going from 15 grams of fiber, maybe go to 20, then 25, then 30, et cetera, et cetera. You don't need to overcomplicate it. Get to at least 10 servings a day. I would do at least half of them raw, if not all. You could obviously do more than that. So, and if you guys are new here, I've been completely 100% plant-based for like 6 years. I haven't disintegrated yet or lost muscle mass or anything in between. So you can certainly go more, but like I'm the days of fighting with people about the nuances are over for me. We need to hit the broad strokes, and the broad strokes is at least 10 servings per day. Ideally organic, if you can do it. If it's not organic, don't freak out about it. You can get a lot of these pesticides off. If you can do some organic, then use the EWG's Clean 15 Dirty Dozen list. They get updated every year. Magnesium, that's one. Poor quality oils. These are going to stagnate the lymphatic system because they're just going to add to that toxic burden, right? The biggest roadblock to getting a lymphatic system flowing, other than not moving, is adding fuel to the fire. So if you're constantly adding fuel to the fire, that's not going to be helpful long term. Another one that I've been harping on for a long time is getting your circadian health in order and sleep. Most of your detoxification, now you're going to be doing some of this all day throughout the day, but the truth of the matter is your liver, your colon, a lot of this stuff is going to be happening while you're sleeping, especially between those golden hours of between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. in the morning. I strongly recommend, if you can get to sleep at least between those 6 hours. Ideally, I would try to stretch it to 7 if you can, but those are the hours you want to be sleeping, because that is when a lot of this detoxification happens. It's at night, and there is no replacement for sleep. Yes, you can take herbs and such to help you get to sleep, but you cannot replace good sleep. You cannot drug your way to good sleep. I remember even when I was in college, when I was playing baseball, yeah, sometimes I would have a beer or two before bed if sometimes I was nervous, but that does not actually make you a better player. That does not actually make you give you better sleep. In fact, it affects your REM sleep and deep sleep rhythms if you use, say, alcohol or medications to go to sleep. Just because you're going to sleep doesn't mean you're getting good sleep. You can't force yourself to sleep. You need to rebuild a healthy circadian rhythm and sleep cycle. And I've talked about that in plenty of other videos. I'm not going to go into too much depth on that because I have tons of posts on them. The massage part. So we kind of talked about it. The one thing I will say is you want to get deep on the massage. So there's one thing I kind of need to mention is like especially for the lymph vessels, you want to massage deeper. I didn't mention this earlier. So there's superficial nodes, but you really want to get deep. So if you could apply a firmer pressure, probably good. And especially again, if you're doing taps, which are also great, if you can use a little bit more force and effort, if you could handle it, and obviously it's not causing pain, go for it. Another tool that's actually really great is red light therapy, photobiomodulation, right? So I talked about this, I think, a couple weeks ago when I was talking about the benefits. But what's really nice about red light therapy, and castor oil is great. I'm going to mention that next. But the nice thing about photobiomodulation or red light therapy is it actually increases vasodilation. Now, we just talked about caffeine, alcohol, stimulants. They constrict vessels. Nice part about photobiomodulation is we know that it can relax vessels, meaning that their diameters get wider, more fluid flows through. Pretty straightforward. There are some studies that show that this happens in the brain, in the glymphatic system, right? The glymphatic system is simply the lymphatic system of the brain. We have fancy names for everything. There are some studies that showed that amyloid proteins can filter out of the brain more efficiently when there is red light therapy done on the head, which is actually really cool. Another benefit is that it can help actually induce what's known as lymph angiogenesis, which is literally just the creation of new lymphatic vessels. Pretty cool. So they've actually done this studies on animal models who have lymphedema, so swelling in lymph nodes. They applied red light therapy, and it actually they saw the building of new lymph vessels, which is pretty cool. Pretty cool. The other thing is that red light therapy can also stimulate the lymphoid organs. So your lymphatic organs, those are going to be things like your thymus. That's going to be like your spleen. Your kidneys play a role. So, what they found is using photobiomodulation on, say, the thymus gland actually increased the function of the lymphatic system. So pretty cool. So red light therapy can be a useful add-on to what we're talking about from a movement standpoint, from a sleep standpoint, from a nutrition standpoint. And by the way, the circadian part, the movement part, those are going to be the two most important, along with the food part. So I guess three major parts. Everything else is going to be pretty much add-ons, except for the last thing I'm going to talk about. Castor oil can also be useful. So castor oil is able to take a lot of things out or stimulate the function of organs. So for example, a lot of people will use castor oil, say, on the liver to help enhance detoxification, which is pretty cool. I like red light because it actually can also increase the function for a few reasons. One is it increases the production of ATP and mitochondrial function, and that's for all cells. So for example, in the liver, in this case, it can also do that, but it also doesn't leave the mess. So like if you're using, say, a wrap or even a panel and you have your skin exposed, you can certainly do that. Dry brushing, also great. I would get a natural, dry brush that is fairly firm. And you want to brush basically towards the chest is really what you want. So you can stroke, say, the arm, come up. You could do the other arm. But what you always want to do is go towards your center of mass. You don't want to rub towards the extremities. So towards the feet, towards the hands. You don't want to do that. You want to rub towards where you're going. So that's another important thing. But dry brushing is fantastic. It's great to stack things. So, for example, if you have, say, like a red light machine, you could definitely dry brush while you're there or meditate or what have you. I mentioned, yeah, rebounders are cool, but again, any movement's going to do it. Running, jumping, jump rope, all these things are going to be fantastic. Don't overcomplicate it. Any movement's going to be great. The last big one that I wanted to touch on was diaphragmatic breathing before I get into some a little bit more detail. So diaphragmatic breathing, why is this important? Well, we have a diaphragm, right? And what it does is when it contracts, it allows more space for the lungs to bring more air in. So what does that mean? You can oxygenate more blood, ideally more efficiently. Nasal breathing is going to be the best way to do this. Why? Because you get a better contraction from the diaphragm. Why does this matter? Because the diaphragm is a muscle. So when it contracts, when it's moving up and down, that's also going to play a role in lymphatic function. So pretty cool. So when you're breathing properly, when you have good posture, and again, your breathing is going to be impacted if your neck is like this and your shoulders are rounded and you're mad and you're sitting all day, that's going to impact your ability of your chest to expand. So ideally, yes, breathing into the belly is important, but you also should be able to, and you can chest test this at home, when you breathe in, even normally, you should be able to feel the sides of your ribs expand out. So not only are you getting an expansion, say, of the belly coming out, you're also going to be getting the expansion of the rib cage. It's kind of like a pump. So it goes out and in. Obviously, this is an exaggerated movement, but if my fingers are ribs, you're going to go out and in with the exhale. So out with the inhale, in with the exhale. Really, really powerful stuff. Again, I've been talking about breath work for a long time in a much more functional and practical way. Yes, there you could certainly take it deeper, and there's so many different methods out there. What I will tell you is nasal breathing at rest, even to mild to moderate exercise, should be done ideally through the nose. In only through the nose. I have an entire course on this. You could check it out. It's that simple. But if you want, does the breathwork course help to stop people with sleep apnea machines? It can. So it depends on how seriously folks take it, because you're going to get out of the course what you put in. So, if you do the work, you can improve it. I will say it's helped my own sleep apnea. I wasn't on a machine snoring, but that completely went away. Not to sell it, but I'm just kind of letting you know that's what happened. That's why I talk about this stuff all the time, because our posture, how we breathe, these are things we are doing every day that we don't necessarily think of. How is our lymph flowing? How well are we detoxing? But it's a really important part, because again, these are the things you do all of the time. Stuff's important. So again, nasal breathing, it should be fairly quiet. Ideally, you want to work yourself up to about 6 breaths per minute. And ideally, you want your inhale to be half as long as the exhale. So think about it: 4 seconds in, 8 seconds out. Slow in, slow out. You don't need to take big breaths. You don't want that. It should be quiet. You shouldn't be able to hear it. These are the major things that, again, even if you just start doing this a few minutes a day, and if you catch yourself throughout the day, you could do it. There's plenty more exercise you could add, but 4-8 is a great way to start. And if you could just kind of get that in your head, it'll go a long way, because you could do it while you're driving. You could do it in the shower. You could do it while you're reading a book, while you're on a walk. There's a lot of ways you could just incorporate this through your day. And not only that, as you start focusing on it, you're going to get out of your head for maybe some of the things that might be bothering you, right? Because you're being present with what's going on right now. Speaking of which, okay. So exercise. So I talked about this a bit. Exercise is going to be really big. Why? Because there's only 4 main ways that we get rid of toxins. It's pee, it's poop, it's breath, and sweat. So most people hopefully are urinating. Most people are breathing, albeit perhaps not as efficiently as they should be. Poop's a big one, and sweat's a big one. So ideally, And honestly, before I put anyone on any sort of larger uh, herbal protocols, I want to make sure someone's having at least one bowel movement a day. And ideally, it should be 2 to 3, depending on how many meals you eat per day. So if you're not doing that, to me, that's step one almost always. And again, usually the more raw, especially fruits and vegetables you eat, the easier that's going to become, especially fruits. Fruits are fantastic for that. So one bowel movement at least once a day. And I say you want to break a real sweat at least 2 to 3 times a week, if not longer. And by longer, I more, I should say at least 3 to 5. Saunas are great. I would prefer it be with movement because now you're stacking wins, right? Not only you get it, and again, none of this has to be for vanity reasons. Like movement does not need to be a vanity thing. I am long past those days. So, the reason why I'm up and moving every day is so that when I'm 80, I'm not kicking myself saying, man, I should have been doing that in my 30s, or because I want to live a life that I will enjoy all the way through, pain free. Like that can happen for most people. I get it. Injuries happen, but like it doesn't need to be some chronic thing where you see people falling apart in their 30s and 40s. And now the second half of their lives are not very enjoyable. And it's almost like you're playing catch up. Get to this stuff now because an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I could promise you that. Two more things, but well, one more thing before we get to the herbs. The other is fasting. So I think fasting is a super powerful tool. I do not really love starting people on a true fast, especially if they're not super healthy metabolically. So there's a lot of ways you could do a fast. And I think there are levels. And again, if you go back to my nutrition post, I kind of have a pyramid that I kind of share people because it isn't something you need to do all the time, but it is a powerful tool if you are up to it. And if you're pooping every day and you're sweating multiple times a week, chances are you're probably in a good spot that you could at least get started or give it a go. Now, there's a few different ways you could do it. And I'll go to increasing levels of intensity. I guess let's go with that. First would be a raw food fast. So I would just try raw foods, for 5 days. Good news is we're going into the summer, right? It's May. So more produce is available, even in northern places, right? I'm in New York. So raw foods are generally easier. And this includes, all raw fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds. That's going to be primarily what you want to focus on. Try that for 3 days, 5 days, see how you feel. Kind of go from there. Ideally, I would say fruits and vegetables is what you want to work towards. You could take that to the next level and do all fruits. I think all fruits is a great place for most people to start, especially if you're having trouble with bowel movements, because a lot of them are very high in different, minerals, uh, electrolytes, especially that are going to help balance. They have a lot of electric potential because of their mineral balance, sodium, potassium, magnesium. A lot of these are going to be in fruits, right? So I always kind of joke with people sometimes in person if they take it, but one of the best ways I think, especially if you're backed up, is to go to the store, buy a watermelon, and try having a quarter to like a half of a watermelon as a meal, and I promise that will get your bowels moving. You could try it once. You could take my word for it. They're coming into season. I love watermelon. That's kind of if I was going to do a fruit fast, start with something like that. Watermelon's great because I really don't know many people who do not like watermelon. Even people who don't eat fruits might eat watermelon. So it's usually a good starting off point. But the truth of the matter is any fruit's good. A lot of people like grapes. But honestly, any fruit, oranges, citrus are all great, again, for electrolyte balance. But most fruits are going to be good with that. So I am a bigger fan. I know some people struggle with vegetables because they either don't like them or they don't know how to cook them or what have you. Mostly, I find it's more the latter. It's just they've had bad experiences with parents or in their kids because most people just don't know how to make them, which is fine. It's just another skill. Fruits are very easy because most of them are raw and most of them taste delicious. Whether you don't like one or two, great. Try the ones you do like and just go from there. You could level it up to juice fasting, although again, like sometimes, especially if there's blood sugar issues, sometimes that might not be the best way, depending on the person, depending on what else they're doing. I would prefer to just eat the whole fruit generally, but if you want to really step it up, you could do that. Another thing you can do is do like a 24-hour intermittent fast. I don't really recommend intermittent fasting beyond 48 hours unless you're working with someone because it's sometimes healing responses could be intense, and if you don't know what you're looking for, you might think something's wrong. So I really don't recommend it, and I don't really think you need to. Certainly, time restricted eating is something you could do too, but there's ways you could play with it. But I do think doing a 24-hour fast, I do one personally once a month. Some people do it once a week. And sometimes I'll stretch it. It kind of depends, but I think at least taking one day a month is really helpful. So now we have a lot of tools, and I just want to recap where we're at. So what you have to get lymph moving? This is a long list of things. So the non-negotiables are movement of any kind. I don't care what it is. It's getting to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables per day. It's getting your circadian rhythm on track, and it's relearning diaphragmatic nasal breathing. Those are the 4 things that are non-negotiable. If you just do those things, you will get your bowel movements to once, at least once a day, ideally 2 to 3. You will be hopefully sweating 3 to 5 times a week, and then you're going to be covering those bases. If you get to that point, now I feel comfortable. Like, okay, let's use some herbal formulas that could be really helpful. Sometimes if you need help with that, so I'll just give you a few. Personally, again, I know I mentioned him earlier, but I like Dr. Morse's herbal blends. Especially if you're having trouble getting the bowels moving or if you're getting started. GI Mover and GI Broom are probably 2 of my favorites. I have GI Daily here. I don't have GI Mover or GI Broom in my room with me, but those 2 are fantastic. So if there's anything going with constipation or whatnot, these are not long-term things. These are things you will do to help the body move things through it so that you can get to a point where you don't need them anymore. So GI Mover, GI Broom, those are probably 2 of my favorites. I would start there. From there, once we get to that point, I would do lymphatic herbal blends, kidney herbal blends. Again, I like Dr. Morse's blends. Those are the ones I use. But again, I really want to emphasize, like, make sure you're getting those 4 things under control first before you start these, because they can only do so much if you're constantly adding fuel to the fire. So that's that. Other lymphatic herbs, if you want single herbs, I prefer blends. That's my bias. That's what I prefer. Some people prefer single herbs, but some are great. Dandelion, golden seal, cleavers, echinacea, grapeseed, burdock, slippery elm, marshmallow, calendula, fenugreek, red clover. All these are fantastic herbs for the lymphatic system. A lot of what I mentioned has one, if not more, of these in them, just in different blends for different reasons, for different utilities. So that is what I got on the lymphatic system. And again, this is no different than whether I'm working with someone in a virtual space versus I'm working with someone in an in-person space and they're recovering for an injury. Because guess what? That swelling can come down more quickly. If that swelling comes down more quickly from an injury, now you can regain range of motion. Now you can alleviate pain more quickly. Now the movements you do are going to be smoother. You're going to get that range of motion back. You're going to enhance healing in a correct way. So instead of laying down scar tissue in all mixed matched different alignments, if you actually move through it, it's going to make a lot of sense. So yeah, that's what I got for today. I'm going to at least close this out on YouTube, but if you haven't, please subscribe to my, my newsletter, Becoming Invincible. I have a new one coming out tomorrow. I try to put a lot of tips and I'm trying to put more actionable stuff in there. So come on, I'm trying to do it twice a week. I will be opening up some new stuff. I'll probably start talking about it more next week, especially if you live in the Saratoga area. So if you do and are interested in connecting with me, we can certainly make that happen. Yeah, so I'm going to close out YouTube quick. I could answer some questions here on IG, but give me a second. So thank you. I hope you guys have a good weekend.